Welcome to another episode of K&E Speaks, where we share ideas and discuss some of the key trends in scholarly communications in scientific research and in higher education. I'm Dr Emily Choynowski and I'm Chief Academic Officer at Knowledge. And today we are going to discuss a really important topic and one that is personally very interesting to me and also to our company. And it's also one that's particularly contentious right now. It's in the news a lot and is becoming a matter of growing concern, namely research integrity. More specifically, we're going to be talking about predatory practices in the academic world. Now, these can take a number of forms, from research manipulation to false conferences, but the most prevalent, and I think the one that again is one of the ones that's really capturing people's attention right now, is that regarding predatory publishing practices, both by the publisher or journal-led and those that are author-led. Now, these can range from paper mills to citation manipulation, from false journals to stolen identities, but predatory practices really are a growing and rapidly contaminating problem that are poisoning our scientific knowledge pool, eroding public trust, and wasting research funds. And it's therefore so important to discuss this topic and spread awareness, because a lot of people don't know as much as they should about everything that's going on. And I am therefore delighted to have a fellow expert join me today, Gareth Dyke. And so we're going to discuss all of these issues today. And Gareth, perhaps you could introduce yourself a bit, tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do.
Awesome. It's great to have the chance to do this. Thank you so much for the chance to join this session today. I'm Gareth. For 20 years or so, I was a full-time researcher, so working in paleontology and geology. That's my background, published quite a lot of papers and was an editor until very recently of a journal in paleobiology. So as a researcher, I've seen like a lot of shenanigans going on. Like I'm still getting lots of emails, lots of spam, lots of invitations to do various things
Oh,
as
so many of those.
a researcher, even though it's probably, well, it is like getting on for 10 years since I was really employed working at universities as a researcher. So I've been working in publishing now, like 10 years or so, with a range of different companies, but mostly working freelance. At the moment, I'm doing sales work with a company called For Evolution. So do check out For Evolution if you're interested in publisher support services. Thank you, Emily. It's great to be here. Let's get into it.
Let's kick off. So I guess the first thing is to discuss, what counts as predatory practice, because it's something from our side as a publisher, as a solutions provider, and myself as you say, I'm also an academic and I do still publish regularly and sit on journal boards, and yeah, the spam emails are often hilarious. But I think there's a lot of confusion about what counts as predatory. Both because people are becoming more sophisticated and therefore there's more scope for what could be predatory, as AI is obviously in a game changer for predators everywhere. But also people often don't understand. I had a talk with a journal editor the other day who said in all seriousness, oh no, but I'm getting my citations up by making all the authors cite us. And I was like, don't, that's citation manipulation. That's unethical. And he's like, no, it's not predatory. So I think there is a concern that from our side as people who know what it is, that a lot of other people don't understand. So perhaps, you could share some of your insights about how we define predatory practice and what comes into what is an increasingly large and
Right.
often quite opaque bucket of concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. And most people listening to this will be familiar with predatory journals. I think that's probably the most familiar aspect of this, where you are being invited to contribute a paper to a journal that's not really legit. It's not really above board. And they're taking advantage of the open access publishing model, where in many cases you're being charged an APC, an article processing charge. And that's just been turned into a way to make money. So that'd be the most kind of obvious. But I guess I would look at this really in terms of any behavior by a researcher or by a publisher or by an editor, because there's lots of editorial manipulation, editorial predatory practices going on as well. Anything that's unethical And we need to talk about that because what does that mean? Unethical, like how's that defined? I think the publishing industry, the academic research world has a lot of work to do to make sure that everybody, irrespective of the country that they live in, the country that they work in, is aware of what we expect in publications because there are many companies selling access to journals. There are
Yeah.
many companies selling citation manipulation. You just mentioned that. That's a huge business here in China. I'm in Beijing at the moment for
Yeah.
the International Book Fair. You can pay to have your citations increased, and I mean it's pretty much mainstream
Guess it's a
because
bit like those bots. So I remember my husband
yeah,
runs a film company, and he was amazed when he dipped his toe in the commercial waters of promoting your film. There were so many companies approached him going, "Oh yeah, we can make sure you are, you're cited. Every influencer in this country will quote your film for an exchange for a fee." And it's sort of like that. That increasingly the way that we manipulate social media, the
mhm.
way that we boost our inflate our reputations either legitimately or illegitimately is being translated into sort of an academic ecosystem now.
Absolutely. I mean, there's citation manipulation, there's journal articles for sale, there's authorship for sale. You name it, you can accelerate your publication journey if you want to pay for that. And I would say fundamentally that's because still around the world, in most countries, in almost all countries, researchers are still assessed based on the quality
Mm.
of the journals, the perceived quality of the journals that they publish in, and the number of papers that
Well,
they
we
publish.
say still assessed, but even then, it's a very recent development, really, the transition towards this very quantitative approach. I mean, I would say the last 10 years, probably. Even
Mm,
now
yeah.
in the UK, if I say to someone, "Oh, but I'm on the board of an editorial board of a journal that's Scopus," and half of my peers go, "You what?
Yeah,
What's Scopus?"
what scope is
I
right,
don't know what that is
exactly.
because it's not really relevant in the sort of the research excellence framework that the UK uses. And yet certainly in this region it's very important. And I know China as well and
Yeah,
a lot of Asia, it's incredibly
right.
important, but it is a relatively new development.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I spent most of my research career in Ireland, working in Dublin, where we were assessed on the number of papers that we published.
Mm,
And that was really the main metric at the time. Then I moved to the UK, worked in Southampton at one of the Russell Group universities. So a big step up for me from a university in Ireland to one of the UK's leading research universities, where they cared about impact factor of publications,
mm,
whether they could report you for the research assessment exercises that happen every 5 years in the UK, and how much money you were making for the
yeah.
department, how much
Whereas I come
grant
from a
money.
humanities background, so the
Exactly.
assumption is probably only five people and a dog are going to read your work in 10 years' time, and there's
Oh,
no
come
money,
on,
but it's
come
not
on.
going to age, so at least it's not going to, become defunct or be superseded in a given period of time. But we've sort
Yeah.
of, for those people who are attending now, I just want to circle back very briefly because you and I are quite knowledgeable about this, and we assume a level of knowledge when we're talking between ourselves. But I think it would help some of our audience to discuss some of those types of predatory practices more generally. So you pulled up three categories there. There's the publisher-led, there's the journal-led, and then there's the author-led. Now, author-led, I think, is one of the easiest to comprehend now in this day and age. It's paper mills, it's when you pay someone to write an article for you, or when you pay someone to give you their spot, like give you an extra spot in a juicy little high impact factor article.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or when increasingly now, when you use AI for image manipulation, that's something that's becoming, in retraction watch and places like that has obviously been talked about a lot. Or to just generate the whole article, and AI can just spew out gobbledygook willy-nilly. But some of the other, I think, publisher-led and journal-led are much harder for many within the community to really understand. So perhaps could you talk about some of the sort of publisher-led malpractices in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure, of course. Just quickly on the author one, though,
Mm.
it's very subject area dependent. And this is going
Yeah.
back to what I was saying before about how, as a community, we need to make it clear what we expect from researchers in our training. I know you do a lot of training at Knowledge E, but in order to show, because in medical sciences, in pharmaceutical sciences, in health sciences, it's quite common to hire a writer to help you put a
Yes.
paper. Whereas in other subjects, in my subject, for example, that would be unheard of, and it's considered
Unethical.
unethical. So it depends. So why is it okay for a pharmaceutical researcher working with a drug company to hire somebody to write the paper for them, and that's not okay in other fields? So I mean, that's confusing for researchers, and it's not
Yeah,
defined.
that is a very good point. That subject specific shift,
Mm,
and also national shifts. I mean, so much
yeah,
depends on national policies as well.
yeah, yeah,
Yes, it just
indeed.
seems it's very
Tricky.
difficult for everyone to know where they
To
stand.
navigate this. So publisher-led
Yeah, coming back to
predatory behavior.
publishers.
Yeah. So this is where a publisher is going to try to get you to just pay them, in essence, right? So they're not concerned about the quality of the paper that you submit.
Mm.
They're not concerned either really about peer reviewing the paper that you submit. They just want to get you to submit something and then get you to pay for that article to be open access. That would be the most common of what we're defining as
Mm.
publisher-led predatory practices. But again, like the onus on avoiding that falls on the researcher because you've got to be aware of what a predatory journal looks like. You've got to be able to sift through all of those millions of emails that you get all of the time inviting you
Oh, I
to
do love those
be,
emails.
yeah, like,
I
do you
like
want
the
to
way they
submit a
make you
paper?
feel like a combination of Einstein and Newton and every great author ever.
Exactly.
Yes,
All the
I
names on them,
am
the names on
clearly
them.
the most amazing person in the world. Thank you.
I never forget during the pandemic, I received an email from Agatha Christie, who was the managing
Oh,
editor at one of the, I forget the name of the journal, but I was like, is that really your name or are you just like making up names to kind of
I like
fill
the ones that always invite me for medical things, and I'm just like, I'm clearly nothing. I know nothing.
Right,
Recently,
right.
the something in AI robotics messages me about once a week, which again isn't even a field that I publish in. So it's just such a they
Wow.
haven't done their due diligence. They're not even trying to find people like who are
Yeah,
accurate.
exactly. They're
Um,
just scraping emails off databases like Web of
mm,
Science, like OpenAlex, for example, and then just sending
mass
millions,
emails.
literally millions of emails. I've worked with a number of publishers that are doing this kind of thing, not really making much in the way of differentiation between who they're emailing. And in Europe, at least, and maybe it's the same in other parts of the world, we have this, GDPR in
Yeah,
receiving
we don't
those
have
emails.
GDPR here, but no, it is
Yeah,
something editors coming, and it's sort of a grey area again because
yeah,
editorial boards, and this is sort of jumping the gun a bit because we'll circle back. But I think one of
yeah,
the big problems is, and it's something we see with predatory conferences as well, is that when something becomes endemic, everyone copies it. So we have editorial boards wearing my publishing hat briefly coming to us and saying, "Oh, we want you to." We've got 200,000 names. Can you email all of them? They don't know who we are. We've got it off a database. And we're saying, but that'll make your journal look predatory. And they're like, no, 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 it's best practice. Everybody does it. And we're like,
right. Well, it's
no,
vague.
specific types of journal do that. And
Yeah,
specific types of publisher do that. It will reflect badly on you and make you appear predatory. But again, it comes back to the fact that these practices are becoming so endemic that it does make it harder and harder to identify who really is predatory and who isn't.
yeah.
And there are obviously tools out there and red flags, but are there any major red flags other than the overly obsequious and flattering email at the beginning? Any major red flags for you on a publisher's website?
The directory of open access journals is also a great
Mm.
place to go to look to see if the journal that's emailing you is really legit. But yeah, what they'll do often is put fake impact factor information, fake
Mm.
editorial board information, even fake websites are used. And predatory journals may copy the name of a
Yeah, the
well-known journal,
hijacking.
so this happens as well. I mean, like the New England Journal of Medicine, may be um, copied by a journal that calls itself New England Journal of Medicine, just to give you a simple example. And researchers look at
Mm.
that, they see the colors, the branding, reminding them of the much more famous, obviously reputable New England Journal of Medicine. They would then go to a fake site, submit a paper, and end up getting charged for it. So check the website, check the journal in a number of places you can go. The Think, Check, Submit directory of open access journals. COPE has lots of resources
Mhm.
on this as well, the Committee on Publication Ethics. But yeah, and also I would say never, ever, ever, ever pay any money for a publication until your paper's been peer reviewed and accepted accepted and you're
Oh yeah,
happy with the peer
definitely.
review. Another predatory practice, sorry to cut you off. Another common predatory practice of publishers is to charge you fees like submission fees
Yeah.
or peer review fees or fast track publication fees
I
to
mean,
get
I would say
money
one
out
of
of
the
you
big
before you
publishers
publish.
did trial, I think was it Taylor Francis? I can't remember. One of the big publishers last year or the year before tried to trial a paid fast track service. Um, So I don't know if that's not, it's no longer a major red flag. The big one for
Okay.
me now is checking the editorial board. So I don't know if you do this, I now run a check once a month on my own name online to double check that no one's taking my
Oh,
identity
there you
because
go.
it happens so
Ah,
often. It's only happened once to me that I've found, but like it's
wow.
enough that they can put someone's name on. Oh, our big shiny published name is
Wow.
on
What
the
journal was
editorial
that? Do you remember
board.
which journal you got
I can't
added
even
to?
remember now. I just wrote them a slightly bullshit email and said, I know what you're doing. And
Was it
it's not like there's
relevant?
anyone you can
Was it?
report someone to, but it is worth, if any of you are listening, it is always worth just double checking
Yeah.
your own name and anyone else's. But also, if you do see a name, even having a name that you recognize whose work you've researched is no guarantee of credibility because they steal names, they steal identities. Sometimes it's like a hybrid chimera where they've got a legitimate university and a legitimate name and pair them together, and that person does not work at that university or in that department. But also, people, credible editorial board members, it's something we tell all of our journals, all of our boards all the time. Make sure your board members mention their involvement with you on their
Right.
websites. So you can always check. But
Right.
yeah, it's something I
So
find very disturbing. They can just steal
can
your identity without you even
I just
knowing.
let me offer you congratulations on your new position as the head editor of AI in robotics. Well
Something.
done, Emily. I mean, the Directory of Open Access Journals, one of the main listing agencies for
Mm,
open access journals, one of the ways that they check journals when they assess them for inclusion is to email all of the editorial board members. And I think this is pretty neat. They email all the editorial board members and they say, "Hey, Dr.
are
Emily,
you?
did you know that you're an editorial board member of X, Y, and Z journal? And are you active?" Because if people don't reply, or worse, reply and say, "I had no idea I was on that editorial
Given
board,"
this
then
honor.
exactly, then that can be a way to check. So that's why directories like DOAJ are
That's
good
so
places to
useful.
start, you know?
And also why they remove, I think they said something like 3,000 journals a year are removed every year to kind of keep everything. That's partially inactive journals as well, but also to keep everything as credible as possible. So that's some of the publisher-led ones. What about journal-led, the editorial board? Because again, those are very hard to see from the outside as a prospective contributor, even as a prospective peer reviewer or other
Right.
board member, you might be signing up for something that is illegitimate. How can you
Yeah.
see,
This
or
is
what
this
do you
is a
look for?
very good point because the author-led integrity issues are potentially catchable. The publisher-led ones are often quite obvious if you know what to look for, as we've just been discussing. But editors at journals can be corrupted, right?
Yeah,
If you're an editor at a journal and you've got responsibility for sending papers out for peer review, even accepting papers for publication after peer review, you are potentially corruptible. And there are quite a number of operations out there that will get in touch with editors. This has happened to me on a number of occasions, offer to pay them a fee in order to fast track or push a paper through the peer
mm,
review process or add authors to papers. So in those two ways, like money can be made by selling authorships and by pushing papers through the peer review process. But you've got to have access to decisioning editors at
yeah.
journals. So,
And I
and
think also, as we touched on earlier, there is that risk of citation rings, which editors
right,
can collude
right,
together and really start to
exactly.
do that. And that's something,
Okay.
there are luckily now algorithms that people are developing,
Yeah,
using AI,
right, right.
uh,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
track abnormal sort of circuitous referencing practices, which is really interesting. But again, impossible for general people to
Hmm.
identify.
Yeah, there's a
Uh,
great tool called Cite.ai,
mm,
SCITE.ai that you can have a look at. That you can use to map citations, but it's also used by publishers to track dodgy citation behavior. Another great tool is called Signals. Lots of
yeah, a lot of
journals
people
use
talking
that
about that
also.
right now on
Yeah,
LinkedIn. I see
right,
it a lot.
right. Ways to check when papers come into the editorial office, if anything untoward has likely happened. And bottom line here, I mean, if you look at a journal like Scientific Reports, Springer Nature's big scientific mega journal, I mean, last year they published about 17,000 articles, right? And the average article processing charge there is $1,500. So you can figure out how much money they made just with one journal on the APCs, given that we know that it doesn't cost $1,500 to peer review and process and typeset a paper and make it into a PDF. It actually costs just a few $100s to do all of that. So the profit margins here are amongst the largest in any line of work, I would
completely
argue.
And unfortunately, I think, here at Knowledge, one of the things we have, we have a charitable foundation, and we, within that foundation, I set up an initiative to promote open science. We really do believe in open science. We believe in accessible education, but there is no denying that the open access movement has been hijacked by for-profit commercial entities, and that does, it paves the way. It's not just the outright predators. There is, the moment financial inducements come in and the more articles you accept, it's not predatory, but it is a grey area of how rigorous are you going to be when you're literally kicking money out the door with every article that you reject. I mean, 15 years ago, no journal published 17,000 articles in a year.
Well, don't quote me on that.
Most would be kind of happy on like, but
that may be
volumes, you do see those
slight
volumes in
exaggeration.
some of the other big journals, particularly those publishing special issues and conference proceedings. But, historically, it just wouldn't have been feasible. It would never have been cost effective because no one would have paid the equivalent amount for the subscription value for a print journal that, like, you need a forklift truck to deliver. So it's just, there is unfortunately that added, I guess, subliminal incentive to be perhaps a little less academically rigorous and a little more profitable, even if you are a legitimate, credible publisher. It is a difficult outlook now.
Absolutely. And this led or has led to a model for open access publishing that was practiced, still is practiced by many of the leading international publishers. This idea of special issues or conference special issues, guest edited by a leading academic.
Organizer or the, So we've sort of covered the counts of what counts as predatory practices, but taking a step back, why do you think it's on the rise? Now, obviously, you've talked about research assessment pressures, and we've talked about the sort of open access in general, but what other big factors do you feel more generally contribute to that rise in both the pursuit of predatory practices, but also a sort of, not surreptitious, but like a sort of tacit acceptance of some of those practices across the academic ecosystem, regardless of country, regardless of subject field? It's sort of becoming so endemic that people are almost just now like,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think money is a big motivator. I think the rise of AI and other various tools that we can use to speed up different parts of the writing and publishing process is also playing a big role. Like, I can literally write a paper in the next 20 minutes and generate all the figures,
it
send it
wouldn't be
to a
you
journal.
writing it.
Well, I can use a range of tools that will
Yeah.
write a paper for me, and I can get that submitted. Whereas previously it would take me, weeks, months, whatever. So there's that, there's the financial side of things. And the fact that, as we've talked about already, like university government assessment frameworks for researchers remain quite stuck. I mean, in just one example, I work a lot in Kazakhstan with researchers there, for example. If you want to get a PhD or a master's, you have to publish a journal article in a Scopus Q1 or Q2 journal, irrespective of your subject area. And you're going to jump in a moment and say, well, that's not fair. If you are a arts and humanities social science researcher, there's just far less journals, right?
But there's only 3 in my field in Scopus.
So
but also
if I offer you a service to get the paper published for you, you're going to pay me, aren't you? I mean, that's the,
But also, I mean, when I think back to when I did my PhD, I mean, I didn't have anything publishable until I'd finished the PhD and then thought about it, and it takes time, and the whole point is when you're doing your PhD, you're learning how to conduct research of that level. You're not already there. That's the PhD process. So it's very difficult.
but
So yes,
that we see
it's
that
very
we see that
unfair.
but I see that all the time with young researchers. Like I teach a number of
Mm.
courses at different universities for starting PhD students. And yeah, like I would say it's very common now for people to show up at the start of their PhD and immediately be thinking like, how can I
What can I publish and
publish?
everything else? Yeah, which is nuts because when I think
Where can
about
I
the
publish? It's a
nature
very
of your
common
research,
question.
but also when you do research the PhD, it's the first time that you actually have time to do that research and do that sort of deep, you need 2 or 3 years to find something worth publishing about,
Yeah,
unless you pick someone. So
or
yeah,
you
no, I can see that that is a
or you can just jump in and start using all of the AI tools that will do that process
mm,
for you. I mean, we used to spend a long time doing a literature review, for example, at the start of each research project. Now you just don't need to do that anymore. You can do it
yeah,
instantly with AI. You can have AI tell you where the knowledge gaps are, those gaps that we'd look for as researchers.
yeah.
And then you can use a tool to write a paper and fill the gap. Almost,
Takes all the
amazing.
fun out of it. So we've talked specifically that sort of angle is like why authors might engage more, but also I guess one of the things that we're starting to notice now is why it matters. Obviously, I mentioned already, that there's the contamination knowledge pool, erosion of public trust, but there's also huge risk to individual authors. So we're hearing increasingly, I'm sure you are too, of universities that are looking when they make hiring decisions, when they make promotion decisions, if they see that you've been affiliated with a predatory journal in the past, even without you realizing, you get a permanent black mark on your name, and it's there's nothing you can do about that. You can plead ignorance, and they're saying, well, you would say that. So why do you think, given these longer term career risks, people are still succumbing to the lure? Is it purely the research assessment pressures, or is it that people just don't really care, or that they don't see it as predatory? They don't see it as a big deal.
I guess I feel it is part of like the pressures that we see like in academia, and people are prepared to take the risk, if you like, and it is a huge risk. I remember in my early career we faced a not a retraction of an article, but an ethics investigation that we can go into if you're interested. But it was the most stressful thing that ever happened to me as a researcher, and had the publisher, the Royal Society in this case, determined that yes, we had republished figures without the appropriate permission from the first paper,
Mm,
which was actually an inadvertent mistake that we made because we didn't know we needed to do certain things as young
yeah,
researchers, which is another problem. But had they decided that this was done with intent, that could have been, that's it. That can,
yeah,
it's
career
so
over.
competitive to get a job, to get a postdoc that, anything to get ahead, people will do it. And we see this with data manipulation scandals, like fake data,
Yeah.
fake, all kinds of research integrity issues. And it's very hard to
Sometimes, often
catch.
with quite senior people. So I was reading, for some reason it hadn't come my way before, I was reading the backstory about that big Alzheimer's data manipulation scandal that came out a few years ago that had actually derailed billions of dollars in funding and mapped the whole way that everyone was looking in one, looking over here and ignoring everything else in the brain. It turns out all of this was spurious and made up imagery and manipulated imagery, and they'd sliced and diced, they'd done every trick in the book, and that was here. And so everyone could have been studying over here and advanced Alzheimer's cures, and they didn't. But those were senior people,
Right.
respected people who did it. Like
Terrible.
it's harder, I think. How do we, I guess this is quite a big question, but how do we counter predatory practices? We can say, oh, well, it's junior scholars who didn't know best practice, and there's that, and it's mid-career scholars who maybe aren't aware of the existence of predators. I think that's becoming less of a good excuse now because people are more aware, but obviously there are still people who don't know about predators. But what do we do when senior academics knowingly engage in these sort of, whether it's manipulating their own research or actively and openly and knowingly supporting predatory journals, or any of anything else, being in citation manipulation rings and things like that? How do we
Mm.
advance ethical practices against that sort of
Oh,
backdrop?
it's a great question. I
It's
mean, other
a
than,
lot.
yeah, I mean, education is one way. I mean, putting your name as an author on papers would be another thing that I think is downright dodgy. If
Mm,
you haven't done any work why should you be an author on a paper? Like ghost and gift authorship is another area of unethical practice. I mean, I do think that publishers, given the amount of money that they make, and we know that they make, should be doing an awful lot more to build tools to counter this kind of thing, to provide education for researchers so that people know what they should and shouldn't be doing. And that's just not there at the moment. I mean,
Yeah.
you name it, you go and talk to different publishers, they all have different guidelines, even down to the level of what kinds of AI input is acceptable for me to have in
Mm.
my research. And do I have to declare that to the journal editors or not? So there's no any like unified industry best
Consensus.
practice at all at the moment. And I think that a lot of effort should be put into that. We need tools that can help us detect these
Unfortunately,
dodgy
I feel like
practices, but that's
if some of the publishers built those tools, they'd also charge a lot of money for them. And
exactly
not all the
right.
journals could afford that. But
No.
again, I suppose it's just while you were talking, I remembered something else that happened last week. We were contacted by someone who said this content. So it was an article that had been peer reviewed, it was legitimate content, it had gone through all the hoops. You know, as a publisher, we've done the right thing. We've done everything that should be done. Someone contacted us and said, that's my thesis. I didn't agree to this publication. And when we contacted the lead author, the supervisor, they said, oh, well, I asked student X, and she said, guaranteed, did not want to publish, was leaving academia, had no interest at all. So I thought, shame for it to go to waste. So I brought in two other students and we finished the work and published it. And, you know, as a
Wow.
publisher, how can you possibly find that out? You know, it's very hard, but also it's very hard, you know, as someone who promotes research integrity, to say, how could you not think that that was unethical? But they
Right.
genuinely saw nothing unethical in that at all. And obviously now it'll be retracted and an explanation provided. But the thing is again, it comes back to that. Yes, there's awareness, and people go, even now they might be aware of like a predatory journal. I guess it comes back to what you were saying about understanding what is expected. But to me, it seems a given that you don't publish someone's work that's not yours.
Yeah,
But the
right.
fact that even now we're still having to say things like, no, no, that's not ethical. Don't do that. It seems bizarre in this day and age that people are still so unaware of the sort of
Yeah, it's
diversity
difficult.
of what counts
Yeah.
as good and bad practices.
Yeah, it happened to me when I was a PhD student as well, like, or after my PhD, like somebody else published on something that we had already worked on. I mean, it's kind of okay, but you need to be aware, like as a researcher, you need to take the time to make yourself aware of these issues and who else is working in the field, like who else is doing what
Mm,
in the field. I think it's all part of the process of learning about being a researcher. And we have to be careful that these corners aren't cut so much with AI that there's no
yeah.
need for any of this anymore. We mentioned like determining where the knowledge gaps are in a field earlier. And that I think it's really important for me at least that, at the start of your research project, your master's or your PhD, you spend time really becoming familiar with the literature, not just
Not
collecting
just
all the
getting us some.
literature and
No, exactly.
making a
And
big pile.
that's, for me, that's part of the process of the PhD. I mean, I think when I did, obviously, because I'm humanities, there's no experimentation element, so it's just purely reading and going to primary sources, reading what other people have said and finding. I was lucky I found an unknown primary source, which was fun, in a monastery in Venice. That was quite a cool little,
Oh,
like, felt
wow,
very like
cool.
Indiana Jones, like scurrying around,
That's
which was
awesome.
amazing. But for me, the whole process was the learning curve is the first year you basically read what everyone else has said and you just sort of filter it like coffee, you know, like in a sort of coffee filter. And then you think, what can I say that's new and different? How do I think about it? How do I do all of this stuff? And I feel like that's one of the sadnesses for me of, you know, people, AI in general, but also specifically when you conduct as an author, the author-led malpractices, you miss out on the best part of why we all love being researchers, which is to do
Yeah,
research.
absolutely. To
You know,
discover something, not just to
we
publish
want
as
to be
many papers
researchers
as
to
possible.
find and to write and to have that joy when your brain
Mm.
sparks and you make that connection. And it's if you do ethical malpractices, yes, you might have a shiny job, but you're not going to do the bits that we all love, which is the research. We
Yeah,
want to, you know, be able to do research.
right, right. I agree. Like, I mean, I feel we may be in the minority a little bit, having that kind of um, view of research to some extent these days. I mean, let me put you in doctors in China, for example, very, very busy, like seeing loads of
Mm.
patients all the time. But as part of their job and their assessment within their job at a hospital here in Beijing, for example, they must publish research
Mm.
papers.
Yeah, we
How do
have
you
that
find,
increasingly here in the Middle East as well.
how can you find the time to do it? I mean, you can't. You have to cut corners. I mean, it's just, I mean, and that
Well,
kind
some
of
of the,
thing is a,
I think to be fair, that's partially something to do with the hospital administration. A number of the administrations that we talk to here set aside either 2 weeks a year or one
mm,
day a week or 2 days a month. They have sort of,
good.
they set aside
Yeah,
like ring-fenced research time so
yeah,
that, because they are aware of those balances. But yeah,
yeah.
it is a shame. But then I suppose doctors are slightly different because you don't become a doctor to do research, you become a doctor to do doctoring. So that, I
Yeah,
guess, is
true. Right,
slightly
right,
different. They're not in it for
right.
the love of the research itself
Mm.
necessarily. Um, but I guess I'm just conscious of the time. If we were to summarize sort of as a bit of a takeaway, if everyone is engaging, not everyone, obviously, that's a grotesque generalization. If a significant proportion of scientific and academic communities of academic scholarly communication ecosystems, if there is such a significant portion of them are engaging in some form of predatory activity in what, as you have shown and as we've discussed, is a very broad array of a lot of kind of grey areas. It's not all black and white. Basically, if almost everyone's doing it, should we care? Should we try and stop it? And if so, how?
Wow. Yes, we should try and stop it. I don't know how. I'm not quite sure like how, but yeah, absolutely. And we would like to think that it's a small proportion of bad actors. I mean, if you look at the huge volume of research that gets published every year, maybe 2 million papers or something crazy like that, how
Or more.
many of those, I mean, how many of those papers are actually even being looked at to see like if there's a problem. I mean, how big is the problem? Are we just talking about the
Yeah,
tip of the iceberg? I hope that most people are, I mean, I believe that most people are doing the best that
good.
they can with the resources that they have and are not cutting corners, paying for X, Y, and Z or so I hope that that the situation with AI hopefully will improve as we develop more tools. And don't forget that in the peer review process, the gatekeeping process of
Mm.
like, research, we are hopefully at the point where people are looking at many of the AI tools that are out there and thinking, these can help us, but we still need that expert,
Yeah,
real person, expert in the research field to sign off on this. And if you're using AI and you're cutting corners as a young researcher, you're never going to build up that knowledge bank, that basis of research knowledge
yeah.
to be able to, perform effective peer review, I would say. I
Well,
mean,
that's the thing. I mean, if you don't actually learn, there was an article out earlier this week that was saying, when you use AI to do a task, you're like they're doing a study and there was some percentage. It wasn't like 100%. It was a notable one that said if you don't do the task yourself, it doesn't log in your long-term memory. So you don't remember the results. So again, I
yeah.
guess that comes back to if you don't do the research, you're not going to have the, yeah, as you say, the knowledge
Yeah.
pool to pull on when you're asked to review someone else's work. Though
Exactly.
obviously, maybe we'll ask you to come back at peer review week to discuss the problems and the pressures on the,
Yeah,
on
what are we
the
going to do for
reviewer
peer review
ecosystem,
week?
which is a whole other very
Right.
meaty topic.
Awesome.
Um, but well, thank you, Gareth. I think this has been a
Thank you.
really vigorous discussion, shall we say?
Thanks
A
for the
couple
chance
of a
to
lot of ground.
participate. Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you for joining us. It's been really enjoyable. Um, Hopefully, people will counter predatory practices in the future, so it's not all doom and gloom. Fingers crossed.
And let us
Uh,
know if you see us on any editorial boards that we didn't know that we were on. That'd be
yeah,
great.
check your name every single month. It's helpful. So yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us.